all dis-ease originates in the psyche, in the mind, in the subconscious mind. It is your perception of those events in your life that catch you off guard, that are emotionally distressing, and that surpass your emotional threshold, that cause imbalance and dis-ease in the body if they are not resolved. If the emotions and feelings and the experience in general is not processed and released from the body in a healthy way. If the conflict, the trauma that was experienced is unresolved, is left unresolved, then over time it can lead to dis-ease. Your genes are encoded with special programming ready to be activated should you experience such a situation, a traumatic, emotionally distressing situation that catches you off guard, that you are not prepared for. And this all goes back to early evolution, because from a biological point of view, survival is always of the utmost importance. Your subconscious mind is programmed to prioritize your survival. And so if you are caught off guard by a situation that pushes you beyond your emotional threshold, in evolutionary times, in nature, being unprepared for an event could potentially be a very serious threat to your survival. Therefore, this biological special program that is encoded within your genes activates in order to help you through that situation in the moment. Depending on how your psyche reacts to the situation, on what your perception or interpretation of the situation is, it could respond by sending a signal to your brain, which simultaneously sends a signal to that corresponding organ or tissue, telling it to adapt in order to aid in your survival. For example, Dr. Hammer, who was a German doctor who founded the new medicine, the new medical paradigm referred to as German New Medicine, which, if this is the first time you're hearing about this and you're not familiar with it, I recommend you check out my video, which is basically an introduction. Medicine that in Spanish is referred to as La Medicina Sagrada, which means the sacred medicine. Then go check out that video. I will link it in the description below so you can learn more about it. I'm not going to get into the details today, but I will have more videos getting into the specifics and just explaining things more in depth as well. So stay tuned, and if you haven't yet, please do subscribe to my channel so you don't miss that. So Dr. Hammer's experience is a perfect example of this. He lost his son, I believe he was 17 or 19 years old. His son was accidentally shot, and after a series of surgeries and procedures in an attempt to save his life, Dr. Hammer's son ended up passing away 2 months later in Dr. Hammer's arms. So this was a very traumatic, emotionally distressing, and unexpected event that caught him off guard. Just a couple of months later, he received a cancer diagnosis of testicular cancer. They found what they call a tumor in conventional medicine on his reproductive organs. And Dr. Hammer, having always been a very healthy man, having no real health concerns up until this point, he found it very odd that this would happen just after his son's sudden death. He really questioned whether this was a coincidence or if something was actually connected here. And over the next few years, basically over the rest of his life, he spent studying this, looking into this, and what he discovered was that this event had activated what German New Medicine refers to as a special biological program in his body, which had a purpose of strengthening and improving his ability to reproduce and to have another child. The particular type of cancer that he was diagnosed with was basically proliferation of the cells in the reproductive area, which he later discovered had a specific purpose. It wasn't a mistake. Nature doesn't make mistakes. So he discovered that this cell proliferation was basically creating more tissue in the area and actually increasing his levels of testosterone, which therefore increased his ability to have another child. So the biological purpose of this adaptation was to increase his chances of having another child to replace the son that he had lost, and therefore potentially resolve this conflict, resolve these feelings of loss that he had experienced. So here's another example. I find that these examples really help to understand how this works. In biological terms, the breast is synonymous for caring and nurturing. And German New Medicine basically categorizes the type of conflicts related to caring and nurturing that a woman or a man in some cases could also experience due to an emotionally distressing, unexpected conflict or situation. So one of the two conflicts is referred to as a nest worry conflict. And this is basically any unexpected, emotionally distressing event related to the well-being of a loved one or of the nest in and of itself, which could be your home or maybe even your place of work. Basically, it's related to a worry situation where you are worrying about that person or about the well-being of your house, of your nest. Perhaps a loved one is sick or had an accident or is in some sort of trouble. This could potentially activate a special biological program in your body, which is really just an adaptation of the breast tissue in order to help you survive. However, it is what conventional medicine would refer to as a cyst or a tumor and could also be diagnosed as breast cancer. So in this case, with a nest worry conflict, what happens is the cells in the breast glands proliferate. But just like everything in nature has a purpose, this happens for a very specific purpose, which is to enhance the function of the breast in order to have more milk available for this nest member that perhaps is in trouble or that needs to be nurtured back to health. And female mammals actually nurse adult male in the event of an emergency as well. And this includes humans. If you think back to evolutionary times when we were living out in nature, in tribes, in a community, in a very tight-knit community atmosphere, we were very codependent on each other, and our bodies evolved with this in mind. And during those times, often the only option that we had to help a loved one, to help care for them and nurture them back to health, was with the help of breast milk. You know, if nothing else was around, the body is so intelligent that it learned to respond out of the norm in order to help nurse that nest member back to health. Even if a woman is no longer in a childbearing age, her breast glands can still respond in this biologically meaningful manner. And actually, it reminds me of when I was going to the doctor, getting checkups and different tests done, because after I had found a lump in my breast several years ago before receiving my diagnosis. And I remember the doctor asking me if there was any discharge. He was describing it as like a white discharge. And now I understand why he was asking that and why that is one of the symptoms or signs of this special biological program running, which conventional medicine refers to as breast cancer. That is not just discharge. That is actually milk being produced because the body, the brain, and the psyche, which are all connected and work simultaneously, are receiving the message that there is a nest member, or perhaps the nest itself is at risk, perhaps it's in danger and it needs extra care. And so this milk is being produced for the potential of helping this member of the tribe. So let's say this nest member is now nurtured back to health. They are no longer in trouble. They are healthy. They are strong. So this conflict that caused the adaptation will therefore be resolved. And then the body will take care of these proliferated cells. There were new cells produced in order to create this milk. However, now that it's no longer needed, there is cell loss. And with the help of fungi and TB bacteria and other bacteria, the body begins to now break down this tumor, the cyst, all on its own because it's no longer needed. And the symptoms of this process of it being broken down are often also misinterpreted and misunderstood in conventional medicine. There are complications that can come along with this, and in some cases it may still be recommendable, it may still be wise to seek medical intervention. Always speak to your physician first and listen to what they have to say. Do some research on your own, go within, and then decide what is the best route for you. Because the exact process of how this works is going to look different for everyone, and therefore the exact process that is going to help you heal is going to vary as well. Now, if you're wondering why sometimes these tumors and cysts do not disappear, are not removed and broken down once the conflict has been resolved, like the example I just shared, well, this is sort of the tricky part, but it's definitely possible to navigate through this and overcome this. But basically what happens is, as humans, we often don't want to let things go. Maybe we don't fully process our emotions and what we're feeling in the situation as it's taking place. And so we hold that inside and it gets stuck in our bodies, and we're carrying that around with us everywhere we go. And so this biological program never fully shuts off. Or what can happen is it does switch off, it is resolved. However, we still have triggers and reminders that are in our subconscious mind that are getting activated and triggering it to start all over again. For example, if at the moment that you received the news of the loved one that was in danger, that needed your help, which also originated this adaptation in your body, if when you received that news, let's say you were drinking coffee and it was a rainy day, it's possible that your subconscious mind identified or grabbed onto the rainy day, this type of weather, or the coffee that you were drinking, or the place where you were sitting at that time, or any of the other variables in your environment present in that very moment of receiving the news. Your subconscious mind may have labeled one or more of those elements as a potential precursor to this type of event happening again. So what happens from there on is every time it's raining outside, or every time you drink a coffee, or whatever that subconscious trigger ended up being, every time you encounter that, the program is reactivated and starts again and again and again. And so it's never able to fully complete its healing process. And this is when it becomes chronic. Now, the good thing is we can navigate that. We can begin to identify what those triggers are and therefore work through them and begin to release them and call them out. But even if you can't identify what they are, there are things that you can do to communicate with your subconscious mind and let it know that these triggers are no longer needed, that you are safe, and that the situation, that the conflict, that the originating conflict of this program has now fully been resolved and it is no longer applicable. Now, the main thing I want you to take away from this video today, though, is that the on switch for dis-ease is in the psyche. It is in the subconscious mind. It is not purely physical. There could be physical elements involved. For example, the coffee or the rainy day, such as in the example I just shared with you. But the root cause is always in the psyche, in the subconscious mind. But this means that the off switch is also in the psyche. And it is your perception of these situations, how you receive, how you respond to and interpret such unexpected, emotional, distressing events in your life. That is the on switch, but it's also the off switch. So this is very empowering. You can learn to understand your psyche and how you respond to different situations in order to prevent, downgrade, manage, or find, or more quickly find a resolution to the conflicts that you encounter in your life. Now, in order to understand how your psyche works and how such unexpected events in your life could affect you and could affect your health, we need to understand, get familiar with your own subjective assessment of different life situations. And your perception, your subjective assessment of these types of life events is dependent on 5 factors: your past experiences, your values and your beliefs, your culture, your social conditioning, and your personal fears or insecurities, your vulnerabilities. And this is why not all people that experience the same conflict shock will experience the symptoms of a same biological special program, quote unquote, dis-ease. So a divorce, for example, could be experienced in a few different ways. It could initiate a few different types of conflicts, which are then going to affect different areas of your body and will determine how your body responds. For example, a divorce could be experienced as a separation conflict. I am no longer feeling the physical touch of that person being next to me, being close to me. There is no longer the skin-to-skin touch. I feel separated. I miss that person. I long to be with that person again, perhaps. So that could be a separation conflict, which would actually affect the breast ducts in that case, instead of the breast glands, like in the example I gave you before. Or if you feel abandoned due to the breakup, due to the divorce, then your body could initiate what we refer to as an abandonment conflict, affecting your kidney collecting tubules. Or perhaps an anger conflict, if there's a lot of anger around the divorce, which could affect the coronary artery. Or perhaps even a starvation conflict. If this impacts the finances in your life to a large degree, it could initiate a starvation conflict, which could affect the liver. It all depends on how each individual perceives the conflict and how they see the world. For some, a divorce may not initiate any conflict at all. So in my case, due to a situation that happened with my husband, where I felt that my boundaries were crossed and I basically interpreted it as a separation conflict on a subconscious level, as it brought up fears of us separating at the time, because after those boundaries had been broken, I wasn't sure how to feel and what I thought and what that meant for us, basically. So I started to entertain thoughts of, should we separate? Is it really the best for us to continue together? Are we going to make it? I feared the separation. I didn't want the separation, but so there was a fear of separation, but also I felt in that moment more separated from my husband. I felt distant. I felt a lack of connection. And so that also contributed to activating this separation conflict, which affected my breast ducts, which eventually led to a breast cancer diagnosis. And if you want to learn more about that, I will also link the video to my story where I tell you more about what happened with me, how I got to that point, and how I began to resolve the conflict once I learned what the root cause was, and how I proceeded through the healing and repair process. So check that in the comments if you'd like to learn more about that, and stay tuned, as I will also be sharing more about everything else that I've been learning and going through since then. But basically what I ended up doing, because I didn't want to separate from my husband and neither did he, we decided to continue together and work on our relationship. And so what I really had to do in order to switch off the program of dis-ease that was initiated was to change my perception of the situation, of myself, and of our relationship, and what that meant for me as a woman and as an individual. But I think one of the most important things to know here, and that I want you to take away from this, is that you have the key to unlocking that off switch, to finding that on-off switch, and to turn it on or turn it off however you desire. And it's not always easy. The results and the healing doesn't always happen right away, but sometimes it does. But regardless of whether or not you decide to go with recommendations from conventional medicine, it is very important that you acknowledge this part of your healing process. Because if you don't find the root cause and turn off that switch, that program of dis-ease, regardless of what you do on a physical level, even if you are removing the physical symptoms, but the originating conflict, the roots are still there, firmly planted in the ground. They're going to continue to sprout, to bud and to grow. And the situation is not going to be resolved. And sooner or later, your symptoms are going to come back. They may come back in a different way, in a different place, perhaps in the same place. But in order to make sure that you get deep, long-lasting results, it is important to understand how you got there in the first place. What was the root cause of this? What originated this? And how can you then work on changing your perception of that situation? Or perhaps changing something in your environment, finding a practical solution to this conflict to resolve it once and for all and prevent any recurrences moving forward. And if you'd like to learn more about that, I'm definitely going to be sharing more about that here on my channel, as this has been a big part of my own healing journey, is learning about this. And I feel very fortunate to be able to be here sharing it with you as well, because I know just how valuable this information can be. And I honestly feel like one of the main reasons that I went through this in the way that I did and learned all of this and used it and came out of the other end is to be here to share it with you today, so that you know this as well, and you can apply it in your life to prevent, to better manage, to resolve, and to heal your traumas, and therefore your psyche, your nervous system, and your emotional and physical body.